Welcome to Scéalta. My name is Joe Austin. If you've just joined us this evening, Scéalta is a production of Fáilte Fears to Hear and Féile An Phobail. And over the period where we've got involved in Scéalta, we've brought you the good, the great, and the interesting. And I have to confess that I'm a bit surprised that our guest tonight has even had time to take a breath, never mind to do a Scéalta. Stan Gordon, producer, director, narrator, playwright, father of three, husband, and I have to correct just behind the window. You're also cutting hedges today, so I've dragged you away from a whole lot. Dan, thank you. And I know you're busy, and I want to talk about Sarah, your daughter, and I want to talk about the film and the directing of the film, and I want to talk about lockdown, and all of that. But primarily what I want to do is I want to talk about you. There's an old-fashioned Belfast joke that I'm sure you're aware of about people having faces for radio, and it probably applies to me. I was asking a fellow actor of yours last night just to try and get some insight into you, and he said all wonderful things about you, but he said, look at his face. That's a face of an actor. That face isn't made for anything else. It's made for acting. So can I ask you, if you were directing a film about Dan Gordon, where would you start?
That's a hard one. I mean, the thing about actors is that they've become more themselves, I think, because there's so many personalities now emerge on television. But it used to be you didn't know the actor behind the character. You watched Coronation Street, or you watched Emmerdale, I suppose they're more modern, but even something like Till Death Us Do Part with Alf Garnett, or and you kind of experience the characters that you play. People kind of think that's you. I suffer from that, from the Red Hand Luke character, ironically, which is probably one of the fewer occasions when it's not about the actor, but it can be disappointing to people as well when they meet you and you go, they say, I was in jail with a boy just like you. And I go, I'm classically trained, and it's a different thing, the kind of, modern world has kind of broken the facade a little bit, and I'm not sure I like that as much, but I wouldn't want to make a film about Dan Gordon. He's not a very interesting person. I think that's a different side to your life, and then you get to portray these various characters, and sometimes the characters can be real head wreckers. My own personal life is very ordinary. I grew up in East Belfast. Went to school there. I enjoyed school. I've done interviews like this before, and you don't really know until you start doing interviews. It's like working with a counsellor, what you're about, I suppose. But I realised in one interview, I like institutions. I have worked, I loved school, despite not being a high flyer or anything like that academically. I don't know if I'd chosen to work hard, would I still have done any better, but I kind of sailed my way through schools, enjoyed it, took part, great joiner. I would take part in anything that was going, from playing the xylophone in the Christmas musical thing, and I had really not a musical note in my body, but I enjoyed being part of that, right through to doing the wee plays or whatever it happened to be. So I went to school in East Belfast. I used to walk to school from, I lived a place called Brandon Parade, which was kind of near the Mersey Street, which is a more famous kind of location. Father was a shipyard worker in his early days. My mother was a housewife. We lived in a 2 up, 2 down in Belfast, very working class kind of background. Father's brothers all worked in the shipyard, and even his sister's husbands worked in the shipyard as well. A few of them then sort of broke away as the shipyard started to go downhill, in the late 50s, early 60s. It was kind of finishing as a real major force. So I grew up in that sort of shadow of the shipyard. As I say, I loved being in school. I loved the organisation. So when I went to the Sunday school, we were sent, Presbyterians, we were sent to Sunday school on a Sunday morning. I think that was so they could make more Gordons. but we didn't know that at the time. And I enjoyed that, actually, the whole being part of, again, organisations or the church as such. I mean, I don't have a faith or anything really at all. I shouldn't really. I don't have a faith. But I enjoyed the whole biblical story thing, the kind of Christian, pseudo-Christian upbringing to a point. Good moral kind of compass, I suppose, in some ways. And whether you follow it through or believe it or not, at least you know the basis of it. And there's some good guidelines there. I mean, anybody has a faith, I'm not shooting them down. Like, good luck to them. You know, I wish I had, but it's not for me. And I saw a better side of kind of church life and stuff like that when I went along. I was in the Robins and the Boys Brigade and the Junior Boys Brigade, things like that. You know, we did a lot of marching. I don't know what that was about. It's kind of polishing stuff. It was kind of pseudo-militaristic stuff that we boys love because we're watching all those black and white films. So that was kind of the very early days. You look like you're going to ask me something. Go ahead.
I was going to ask you two things. And you mentioned David, your father, and Irene, I believe, your mother. And I want to talk a wee bit about your Granda Gordon as well, just very briefly. But what I was going to ask you was, in the family, was there a history of acting, or people have been involved in amateur theatre or anything? So you just kind of came along.
No, very Presbyterian kind of background in many ways, I suppose. Not that they were a church-going family or anything like that, but just it was the head down and work and know your place. You were expected to leave school at 14, and back in those days, in my father's time, and then start in the shipyard or start in a working environment. It was a different thing culturally, you know, in my experience from my East Belfast Protestant upbringing, in that there wasn't a lot of singing or musical stuff, and even when people got together for parties, it was really about drinking, you know, not a lot of singing, which I kind of was envious when I heard of other people doing that. But my own personal experience with my father and his brothers did get together, and it wasn't a lot of occasions. It would have been fairly, you know, it wasn't a big, well-connected family that got on, or certainly we were on the edges of it. But when they did get together, it was just about drinking Bushmills whiskey and seeing how many you could drink, you know, and Tennant's beer. I remember that, which kind of put me off the drinking thing as well. As a kid, you know, I didn't like it, and I didn't really get involved with it ever. I still would drink occasionally, but that put me off. So my father's brothers, there were no, to my knowledge, there was nobody in the family involved in performance of any kind, which is kind of a bit sad. But in other ways, their strength was in work. And I had an uncle who had pigeons and stuff like that, I think. And I wasn't that close to them. I didn't really know what other things they did. I kind of know I was the first in our family and I loathe it dearly. I loathe the whole concept of the 11 plus or the transfer test, or the intelligence test, I think they called it when I was doing it. I just liked wee quizzes. So I think that's why I passed it. You know, I enjoyed the problem solving stuff, and it got me to a grammar school down in Hollywood at the beginning of the Troubles, out of the trouble. And but as a concept, I you know, sorting kids out at 11 like that, you look back and go, my God, that's such a bad thing. It's such a wrong thing to do, to label children failures when it's the only exam in their lives and they'll be able to resit. You know, that's another ball game. I'm very kind of opinionated about that. And yet I had the benefits of a terrific system. You know, going through, again, loving a school. And joining the ornithology club, but I didn't know what ornithology meant. You know, there was debating societies, you know, grand names for these things. They weren't as grand once you joined them, but they were good fun, and even stuff like Scripture Union that was involved in it once too. And that took us away out, and we did, you know, trips away and socialized. And you got an opportunity then, because we kicked up a gear, and that became sort of lower middle class label then, when you were at a school like that, you know, and you were mixing with kids who had money, you know, and you could kind of see where it could take you as well, you know.
Last night, this probably won't come as any great surprise to you. I phoned Tony Devlin.
Yeah.
I was trying to get him to tell me some of the some secrets or some, and he wouldn't. He wouldn't. So very much to his credit. But what he did say about you was he said he's a great storyteller, and he also is someone he observes people. He watches people. He takes people in. It's more than their image. It's about who they are and what they are. It's about kind of them as a holistic body, rather than simply what they work at or what kind of car they drive or what part of Cherry Valley they live in or whatever. And I come from a doctor's family. My father and all my brothers were doctors, and I, as a young man, I was too genteel to work at the dock, as you probably can tell. But I listened to the stories that they talked about and the characters they talked about that they brought home with them, and they nearly painted this picture. This is in the latter half of the 50s and the early 60s, when we didn't have access to what passes as entertainment. So this was the entertainment, talking about the characters, and looking through and reading through some of the stuff that's been written about you, and indeed some of the stuff you've written in the boat factory, for instance. Were you conscious of the fact that the shipyard done more than make ships?
As a child, not really. As I say, you would hear the big air horn at 8 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock at night, and just assume that the masses of men going down there were going down to just do their job and come home. I had no concept of what was going on behind until later years, when my father would open up a little bit about different people, because he maybe met somebody on the Newton Ards Road that he had worked with, and the boy would greet him with great fondness and they'd have a chat. And I'd go, "Who is that man?" You know, and he would say, "Well, that guy was another joiner." My father was a joiner, a carpenter, served his time there anyway. And he would say, "Oh, he was a fella that did this or did that," and he would tell me wee stories about the men working together, and that again, that organizational thing really appealed to me. And I wrote The Boat Factory. My father died from asbestosis because of working around the pipe laggers in the shipyard, allegedly. There was a payment. And he was only 62 when he died. You know, I mean, I'm 60 now, you know, and my grandfather was 62. So maybe you're catching me at a good time here, you know. But my father opened up about the people and the whole background to the place. And I felt it was something I wanted to rescue and preserve. And when he was dying, it was too late to go and record him. And so I wrote it as a kind of a cathartic thing. As well, because it's a two-hander and he's a kind of main character, and it's through his eyes that I invented stuff as well. And then when I went to my mother with some of the material, she went, "How did you know that?" And that was kind of shocking, you know, that I invented a character called Wee Geordie. Spoiler alert coming here. He's another apprentice that my father meets when he goes in. Age 16. My father, during the war, my father was evacuated from 43 to 45 down to Bangor, working at a shoe shop, which he hated. And I didn't know that. My mum told me that, because I was trying to figure out, why did he not start when he was 14? Because I had his indentures and he was 16. And she said, "Oh, he worked in a shoe shop." I never knew that, you know, it's so not my dad. So I wrote a little prologue with that in it, but then he joins the shipyard and he meets this other kid who's a kind of a year or two ahead of him, and he looks after him. But he's a smaller guy, and who had polio at one stage and can't walk so well. He works as a carpenter, wanted to be a painter like his dad, but can't climb, technically. And I invented this character, and at the end of the play, the spoiler alert is, the character Davy reveals that Geordie was killed crossing the road, the Newton Ards Road. This is a fictitious character, and I well up when I talk about that. And my mother said, "How did you know about his friend?" And I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." She said he had a friend who was killed on the railway line at Sydenham. And he said it was the best friend he ever had. And I was so shocked that my father had lost a friend at that age and had a similar experience. You want to think it's just a quirk, a coincidence, or is it something in the DNA that kind of just surfaced? You don't know these things. You kind of make up stories. But So I needed to do that cathartically, and I wanted to preserve that environment and that background, because again, I found my side of the house isn't great at sort of saying all the good stuff about what they've achieved, and how they've achieved it in a way that they share it outside. And I wanted to do that. I mean, there have been people like Sam Thompson, who has tackled Shipyard in the past, Thomas Carnduff, Richard Hayward, but they're thin on the ground, and there are not too many women get involved in it either, and you want to hear those stories. So having come through the like of in my early career, meeting people like Mary Jones and Sharabang Theatre Company with Carol Moore and Eleanor Methvin, and they were writing and creating women's stories, and it kind of lodged with me in later years, thinking they did it once, I think I could have a go at that. And that's why I did it and wrote The Boat Factory,
I want to ask you, because I can find stacks of stuff and comments from you about your father and your grandfather coming from Scotland and all of that stuff. But I also suspect, reading through, there's a gentility about your, in my opinion, for what that's worth, about your writing. You talk about The Boat Factory, an equal measure of its harshness, and also of its friendliness, of that kind of comradeship almost. Was your mother an influence on your work, or was your mother somebody who supported you, somebody?
No, my mother was a very big influence. I mean, my mother left school at 14 to go and work for Stewart's Supermarkets or something like that, and she was kind of missed the opportunity to have a real education as she sought, get to stay in school for a longer period. But so she was a great believer in libraries. We were a member of the Hollywood Road Library from very early on, and she would take us down and make us take books out, whether you wanted them or not. And I noticed, she was trying to read Voltaire, and I think she made a good stab at Ulysses, because that was a book that was in our house. I remember seeing one of the first books that I kind of looked at. It wasn't a kid's book, that didn't belong to me, and it was my mother's. And she had a thirst for education. In later years, she actually went and sat at an English O-level around the time that my brother and I were doing ours, and she got an A. I think we got B's. And she just had a thirst and an interest, so she would encourage us. And I think this is part of the difficulty with kids, getting home support. If you've got home support, somebody who says, "Where's your homework? Get it out." I don't know if homework's that really worthwhile, but the fact that it makes a connection, if you've got parents or a parent who will sit you down and make sure you do your homework, they kind of keep tabs on you and know that you're at least putting something in or doing something. And my mother was very much that figure, and was keen that we would get to stay on at school as long as possible, and encouraged us. She had no idea about university and how you got to university. And I went to Stunmillis College and trained as a teacher in English and drama and PE. But they had no idea. I would love to have gone to drama school, but that wasn't even we had no concept that you could get to a drama school or how to do it. And the little inroads that I made in school, the careers people went, yeah, we don't do that. And so it was kind of a missed opportunity, and possibly a different life had I gone to RADA or Central or whatever, but just no concept of how to do that. And by that stage, I'd hooked up with a guy called Sam McCready, and my mum knew of him and said, "Look, yeah, go to that." And she actually had heard it on the radio, Sam on the radio or something, saying that he was going to do this thing called the Lyric Drama Studio, connected to the Lyric for young people. So my mother told me about it and sort of sent me off in that direction. And she kind of made those little inroads, she'd have said about doing different things or trying things, or should have heard something on the radio. Avid radio listener, and would listen to Radio 4. I'd listen to the plays, the short stories, Women's Hour, anything like that while she was doing housework, So yeah, she would have had an influence. But I think in equal measures, my parents kind of had had those sensitivities and encouragements, you know. It's just me talking about myself here. I'm sure other people could much more interesting stories, but that's my background, you know.
You're fiercely loyal about your working class background. Fiercely loyal about it. And I suspect if we were having a pint and I said something in this about East Belfast, I would get a poor deal. I think you've that kind of passion, you know, when you said it aligned or maybe deliberately and maybe not, you know, if we don't tell the story, it's lost. And I absolutely believe it. Recently, I was in East Belfast and I picked up a book by chance, just complete chance, a community book, and it was writers, poets, uh, artists, all who came from this a very rich tapestry of people involved in the arts. And I knew very few of them. If you asked me about East Belfast, and I suspect lots of people would be the same, it would be Van Morrison and you and little or nowhere else. You went on, I want to come back on that subject, but you went on, you mentioned the teacher training and stuff like that. I can't imagine you. I can imagine you teaching. I can't imagine you putting up with the formality of teaching. Were you a good teacher?
No, I just did stand up with the kids because by that stage when I started to do teaching, I had started to be on telly and stuff, and I suddenly realised that these kids are being looked after well by the teachers that are normally there, and they would have left me a pile of work for the sake of the work to occupy them while I'm minding them. And I used to sometimes push that work to the side or do it with them really quickly and then set it to the side and then let them ask me about what I did, because they hadn't experienced somebody who'd been on television before in that way, and they wanted to know stuff. So I would do that, and I would practice jokes on them or just encourage them to talk as well. Because I realized quite early on when I was trying to be a teacher, I'm shouting at kids for their homeworks, for a bit of poetry or something. And this kid has come in with his pajamas under his clothes because he got himself up that morning because his mother's an alcoholic and he lives with her. And he didn't get any breakfast and he came to school on his own. And I'm thinking, my God, and I'm shouting at this kid about poetry. You know, so there are better people than me equipped to teach children, you know, and to educate children in a formal way. And I suppose that was one of the things I realized when I went into teaching, that I wasn't right for it, that I couldn't make a big enough impact by doing it, maybe in a few individual lives. And I was greedy. I wanted it to be bigger. I wanted to hit more people with it. So I ended up writing plays for kids, which I did down the line. And giving all the children the opportunity to be in it, even if they didn't want to speak, and having those lines. I mean, I should probably qualify what I said about we don't tell stories, because we do tell them in a limited way. I mean, you've got geniuses like Stuart Parker, you know, who have been out there, and Van de Man in the music front, and then and we're getting better at getting it all down. But we don't, as a community, seem to embrace it and celebrate it in a mass way, in a way that goes, this is us and who we're proud of. And I think it comes from centuries of knowing our place and not shouting about who we are and what we do and what we're capable of in ways that we weren't allowed to in the past. Well, as I say, we are getting better at it, much, much better at it. But I suppose that when I grew up, it's my own experience that I'm talking about, you know, and it's dangerous to generalize. But I never went to something where they went, this is a local guy doing stuff at his praiseworthy and we like him for this. Because when you get too big for your boots, we all just shoot them down. We say, oh no, we find fault with them. And that was my experience within a community, you know, on a personal level.
I think you've been too modest, to be quite honest. And I know that for a way, I don't want to dwell on this, but I want to come back to it. I know that for a way, for instance, in West Belfast, where I am, that you were involved in a theatre group on the White Rock Road, a women's theatre group, which was doing all the things that you just advocated. It was building confidence with women to put on a play about their lives, their experience, and life. Yeah. But before we get into that, I want to ask you just, you speak very fondly of your early days in the lyric theatre, even though the job must have been crap. It just sounded like that you were at everybody's back and call and sent to the shop for cigarettes when you had nothing else to do. But did you enjoy it?
Oh yeah, again, just somebody telling me what to do, you know, somebody caring enough to say, go you and do this. Brush. I remember the stage manager said to me, Dan, when I ask you to brush the stage, I'm telling you, you know, so you know from the get-go. So I kind of didn't mind that because I was used to being told what to do, and I wanted to be there. You know, it was an acting assistant stage manager, which was kind of the lowest of the low, which meant that you did the stage management work, you helped look after the building because they didn't have a caretaker properly that would do it. There was a wonderful woman in the lyric called Marianne, but you know, she couldn't get up and do light bulbs or fix plumbing or stuff like that. She would have to get somebody in. So quite often she would ask me to do bits and pieces, and I worshipped the woman, so I would have done anything for her, you know. She'd been there forever. But just being part of it, and as an acting assistant stage manager, you then did the lights and sound and props and things on the show, and occasionally they would let you be in it in a very tiny part. So it was a spear carrying part, and I got a few opportunities to do that. And it was also the days when you got an equity card when they offered you a contract. Every theatre could give away 2 equity cards a year, which was a good enough system actually, because although it kept people out, when you got in, it meant that they looked after you in a way that they felt responsible for you. You know, they gave you an equity card, so they gave you at least one part, and usually 2 or 3 over the period of a year to nurture you, and that was an opportunity in repertory theatre to give you a start. Unfortunately, now people come into the business and then they get blown out of it again very quickly because they can't sustain it, or there's nobody helping them or looking after them. They haven't been a big hit straight away. They don't last. And there's a lot of kids coming into the business who just spend a huge amount of money, which worries me about, you know, well, if I go to this place and do these courses, I'll be an actor and that'll be guaranteed. And coming out the other end of it, it's a lot harder to sustain. And it's almost like the American system. So you're an actor, which restaurant, you know? And I do worry for some kids who maybe are badly advised and they're told, yeah, you pay that money, we'll take that money off you, we'll make you an actor. And really, if it was about equity cards, they'll go, look, you need to go away and think about this for a while, or try doing some stuff first before you come back, because you're really not ready to do this, you know. On the other hand, there are others that will break through. And when people ask me, parents used to ask me, should I send my kid to university or send him to drama school? I used to say send him to university, get that degree, get that opportunity for a job. Those jobs aren't out there anymore. It's a different world. So I say, send him to drama school. You have a good chance. So I'm contradicting myself here.
That was the advice your father actually gave you. If you're going to be an actor, get something sensible that you can fall back on. Can I ask you about Kathy?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, where did you meet her, or where is she from, or what did she do?
Well, Kathy's my wife, my long-suffering wife, who and we met in college. We were in the same drama class, and I went out with her best friend for 3 years, and she had been out with another fellow for 5 years. And at the end of the university period, we somehow got together, and we've been together for 38 years. And she was is a teacher, and has been keeping my feet in the ground, and is the kind of somebody to fall back on, you know.
Is she your sounding board? Is she the person that you first let hear the part that you're playing or the piece that you've written, or is she beyond all of that now?
Absolute opposite. I wouldn't let her come to first nights. I get her to help me learn lines occasionally and shout at her when she reads the stage directions accidentally. It's a kind of a separate world. I keep the worlds very separate. And then she does come to stuff and sharing stuff once it's up and running. But I am a very singular individual when it comes to doing the work, and it's kind of keep the two separated, you know. So that's maybe that's what's made it work so well, you know.
Having said that, you have 3 daughters. I want to talk about them all, but I want to talk about Sarah.
Well, this is dodgy ground. This is dodgy ground because My children don't like to associate, when you were dropping them off at school and you had to do it around the corner so that people wouldn't know I was with them. That kind of works its way on through now into later life too. They forge their own careers, and they do what they do. And when people say, "Oh, your daddy's red hand," look, that's not a good thing to say to them.
That wasn't what I was going to ask you. You're directing.
Oh no, but just go ahead.
I was going to ask, but before we get to that, the point that I'm going to mention was that if anybody is going into acting to make a fortune, these are the things that happen on TV. They don't happen in real life. So to have 3 children and to be a struggling actor, it must have been at times. It must have been quite difficult.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's why I did sub-teaching. I did sub-teaching for the first couple of years and did like 182 days in 1 year in substitute teaching. The school I went to was a big school, and they had 80 staff, so there was always somebody off. And at one stage I did, and it's hard to get, at that stage it was hard to get men to be sub-teachers because teachers got sort of sucked into the system. Men were quite often breadwinners in their homes and wanted full-time jobs, so weren't interested in substitutes. So usually it was women who were doing substitute teaching, and if the school was a little bit tougher, it was useful to have just a bloke, a male figure, to be there. And I just kind of was able to sustain it between, really that was one school I kind of went to all the time. And I really enjoyed it. And it wasn't a tough school, but it had its moments. And they found it useful for me. And also because I was PE trained, when guys go off on courses in the PE department, or they're taking away a team for some project or to play somewhere, they would have called me in to look after the kids that were still needing to do PE but weren't on the team or whatever. So I did a fair bit of that, and that allowed me to sustain having 3 kids. And I had a big fallback on my in-laws. I mean, my mother-in-law and father-in-law were tremendous people. My father-in-law just died last year, age 90, and my mother-in-law a few years back, sadly she had dementia in her later years. But they were terrific people. They lived in Rathcoole in North Belfast here, and just great folk, real hard grafters, couldn't do enough for you. My father-in-law had retired and was driving the kids, would come down and drive them to school in their secondary school years. And my mother-in-law would be down here at 7 o'clock in the morning to look out for the kids, while my wife was getting ready to go to school, to work, and she was really sustaining the finances,
The periods during that, because acting is, and I think my view of it, I think you need to be quite brave to be an actor, to be honest. I think anybody that sets themselves up for public ridicule, or public approval, is tough, and is tough skin. But was there periods during that when the kids were young, and you're speaking very, very well about your in-laws, but was there periods when you almost walked away, when you thought, this isn't going to work, I'm not going to be a director or an actor or a writer now, or were you just dog it and stayed in?
I think it was because it was something that I had a burning desire to do. I mean, you talked about working in West Belfast. Really, when I hooked up with Mary Jones and Pam Brighton in West Belfast, when they resurrected a company called Double Joint, which was Dublin and Belfast was the concept, and they'd done one show and then it kind of fizzled out. But the company still existed on paper, so they rekindled that, and I was a big part of that. And Pam was the director, Mary was the writer, and I was the actor. And we had done a play of Mary's called Christmas Eve Can Kill You in the Old Museum, and it was all self-funded. I think we all ended up with 40 quid after 4 or 5 weeks work, and Pam and Mary saw the opportunity. They wanted to do something more, and that was where a one-man show called The Night in November kind of came out. And I suppose that decided for me in it must have been '94 that I'm going to stay at this. You know, it had been patchy up to then. I did tellies, and I'd done a sitcom for 3 years in BBC Network called Foreign Bodies. I had been in a Mike Leigh film. But I toured as well. You know, I was in Edinburgh and Musselburgh and down in Exeter and Southampton and Plymouth doing plays and pantos and stuff like that. And it was patchy, and I didn't quite know what I was doing, and I was drifting a bit, I suppose. But when I met Mary and Pam properly and we started to work together, I went, this is what I want to do. I want to tell stories about Ireland and Northern Ireland and the people that I live with and grew up around, and use their voices. And Night in November was a big watershed moment for me. It's a story about an East Belfast prod who goes to the World Cup in 1994 and follows the Republic of Ireland. And it kind of, it was a cathartic experience because it allowed me to deal with prejudice. It allowed me to deal with understanding other people. I mean, I didn't cross the border till I was 17 on a rugby tour to play Blackrock College. So I really didn't have a great concept of what it was like beyond these shores. I mean, I think I'd been to Prestatyn in Wales with the Boys Brigade to camp and an air on a day trip. But I'd never been in an aeroplane till I was about 18, you know. I'd never really gone beyond the shores. So this was the next kind of watershed moment for me when I hooked up and I saw what was going on. And there was a different system. As I say, doing a play like A Night in November, which was a pretty difficult piece of work to listen to, and had swearing in it, and it was a difficult topic. It toured parish halls, and that was a big eye opener for me to find myself playing in parish hall, because I couldn't imagine me getting to do that on where I came from. I couldn't get into a church hall and use the language I was in the play and get away with it. Now, in recent times, I have done this, but in the old days, that wasn't something that was open to me. And I kind of liked that opportunity.
I went to see the play, and I remember my jaw dropping. I remember hearing on stage, for me, stage was and plays were what other people went to see. If they weren't in working class areas, or if they were very few and far between. You may have gotten the Christmas nativity play and as you say, a parish hall, but your play, which was about people that I lived to see, about people who I knew about me, and the language was the language of the street, what's called the language of the street. It's two things struck me watching the play many years ago since I saw it. One was the physical demanding part of the play, because by the end of the play, it struck me that you were exhausted. Maybe that's not true, but and the other thing was, it struck me, and I'm sure this isn't the first this has been said to you. You had characteristics of Jimmy Ellis. You came away, and it maybe was more than the accent, but you were somebody on stage who I can identify with. The reviews were very good, if I can recall right. But was there any criticism of it?
Yes, there was criticism, and the criticism was kind of right. It was the criticism sort of said it's naive, it's one-sided, and that was coming from people who weren't from the Protestant community, and people who weren't from the Protestant community were saying things like, "You're very hard on the prods," and but it was a kind of a cathartic experience, and it was one-sided. It was meant to be a bit naive because it was one guy's point of view, and nobody's perfect, you know. When somebody kind of sits up and looks at their own community and takes against them, they don't see the good. They don't remember all the great stuff. They're only seeing the bad. It's like when people in families fall out and don't speak to each other for years. You only see the bad. You don't remember that good. So there was that element of it within the piece. But we were doing, so you mentioned Jimmy Ellis. I'm glad you did, because those guys, and before, well before, in the days of Thomas Carnduff, way back in the day when the empire was full of working class people seeing plays, when there was no TV. TV took over and robbed the theatre and robbed the storytellers of that audience and that opportunity. And all we did was we tapped back into a vein that already had been opened many tens of years before. And in a great way. But Sharabank did the same thing as well. You know, the Ulster Theatre companies way back as well. And I think there is a thirst if the material is relevant to people and you can find a new way to bring it to them. And at that time we found a kind of a welcome on a circuit, and we were able to play that. And it went from the West Belfast Festival through, and we finished in the Opera House, we went to Broadway, and it took me back to my Presbyterian upbringing when they told me all that stuff about Jesus, saying always sit in the humblest seat. It's something that I kind of have adhered to. You know, you don't say, when you hear this joke, it's really funny. Just tell a joke. You know, you don't announce that you're going to do this big thing and everybody's going to love it. You do it quietly in a corner in what was a tiny little festival then, back in the day, in the West Belfast Festival. And we filled St. Thomas's Hall, the old school hall. And you go, wow, people really got this, and we really made a connection. And you can't do that every time, but when you do it, my God, you really feel you've achieved something. And that was why I wasn't a teacher. I was able to do it to a whole lot of people over an extended period of 5 or 6 years.
I think it opened a lot of doors, and it allowed a lot of people who perhaps have aspirations of being actors, for better or for worse. I think that playing around the corner from their house or their granny going to, I think it done a whole lot. It's just to give people a focus of a voice of saying, yes, that's what I think. I understand that now, and that's what I've been thinking. I just didn't quite know how I wanted to say it. And if you do a play or you do a great piece of music or work or poetry or art, I think then that helps people articulate what they had already thought, you know. And I think that's what we did with The Night in November and with subsequent work as well. And that's why I continue to stay here and work here. I want to ask you two things. I want to ask you, first of all, you've moved in, or you maybe not just moved in, but you're now involved in directing and producing. Is it a difficult area of work?
Yeah, yeah. I just wanted to be an actor, but I love more living where I live, and I love being with the people and the quality of life that I have here. And it's just the kind of niche that I've fallen into. And you can't just be an actor in Northern Ireland, even in Ireland as a whole on the island, you know, because I love the theatre and the immediacy and the connection that you have in theatre. There's not enough theatre work around to be in every play, you know, and to make a living. So you're forced. I mean, I've been writing for 5 years for the Sunday Life newspaper as a columnist. I was only supposed to be a week. And they went, yeah, could you do it next week? We're stuck. And I just suddenly found myself doing this. But, by diversifying and doing lots of things, the way farmers have had to, the way lots of people have had to, you have lots of jobs. So I kind of was forced into directing and producing. I really hate producing. I've just filled in a form there, and the Arts Council were brilliant and really helped me along the way, but it still turned my head inside out, you know, trying to get this thing, and they give you the guidance and it's all there, but it's just not in my nature, but it has to be done, you know, so that's tough.
You mentioned earlier when we were talking about your daughters and their own individuality and their own careers, and their careers are their careers and they're not your career.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you this question, just a matter of interest, and you can answer it in whatever way that you see fit. Is it difficult directing something that is produced by somebody so close to you? That's
you're referring to my eldest daughter's in the business, the other two aren't. And I actually encourage them not to be in the business. And my eldest daughter, she came along. I was stuck for a student to work a follow spot in a Christmas show. And the guy who was the production manager was very offhand and said, look, students are all the way home. Can't get anybody. You'll have to do without. So I was bloody minded, and I talked my daughter into coming and working a photo spot. And that was the biggest mistake I ever made, because from that, then she went on into lighting, and she works in film lighting and stuff, but she writes as well. And recently you're referring to a piece that she wrote for Brassneck Theatre Company that her and I co-directed. And yes, I mean, up close, that it is very hard to reach an agreement, because you've got a shorthand that is already going on, and she's she's at the start of her career, and she's very jealous of her work and wants it to all be in, whereas I'm at the other end of the career, and I kind of know that you have got to make, it's all about compromise, and you're never going to get what you initially imagined, through either because it wasn't always a good idea, or through to somebody has a better idea, to it just simply isn't going to work like that. And reaching those compromises has been quite difficult. But at the same time, I haven't fallen out. I mean, you get that in all levels with working with writers. I mean, I've worked with some brilliant writers, and I love doing new work. That was the thing I discovered with Mary and Pam. Pam was a genius director and editor, and Mary was a genius actress and writer. And just being in that mix and learning from them, that was my drama school. That was my real drama school. Pam Brighton and Mary Jones taught me everything I never needed to know about acting, I think. And being part of that, we had, you knocked heads constantly. But doing new work and working with new writers and having the opportunity to say, look, I've been down this road before on a project, and this doesn't really work the way you're taking this, in my opinion. And if you can convince them to take it in another direction, it can be good. Sometimes they'll argue their case. I mean, Graham Reid, who wrote the Billy plays, I was in the rehearsal room when he had his first show with Adrian Dunbar, actually, playing one of the boys, The Hidden Curriculum. And the director was saying, could we just change it? No. Well, can this? No. And I said no to everything. And it was a brilliant play. He didn't change a word. And it was brilliant, and it worked. So that taught me stuff too, And then I've been in other plays where Pam and Mary would be going, they would never go at it. Pam would say, no, take that scene out, it doesn't work. And Mary would think about it and then say, okay, because they would have a discussion about it. And seeing all of that new work evolving, I've been involved down the years with everything from like Tea in a China Cup, which was about the loyalist community and a woman in her last days wanting to see the bands one more time, and her daughter, the next generation, remembering how she grew up. A wonderful piece. And I was in that with Stella McCusker, Paula Hamilton, Louis Rolston, Trudy Kelly, Sheila McGibbon, stalwarts of the Ulster Theatre way back in the day. And I learned watching them and listening to them. So the new work, working with new people, meant when I met it with Sarah, with my eldest daughter, I didn't have too much of a problem, because I'd seen all the rows, I'd seen all the way that people change and negotiate. And I knew as well when not to fight her, when not to take her on and go, you know what, I'm going to let her make that mistake, because she'll see at the other end.
I have a Sarah. And
right.
Sarah. I don't know what her your daughter has. Sometimes the wisest thing to do is nothing.
It's being a parent.
We're almost out of time. We've been speaking for nearly an hour. And I want to ask you two things. Probably there is hardly a day goes by that you don't hear someone from a section of industry, whatever it may be, the farmers, the taxi drivers, the hospitality, on speaking about the difficulties of lockdown and the hardships that lockdown has imposed, and that's COVID. And we didn't invent it, and we didn't, it isn't our fault. But the arts have suffered particularly, not just because people aren't able to apply their trade, but because they're not earning any money. Now what we have, lockdown at least, and hopefully, in touch wood, lockdown is going to be lifted very soon completely. How did the public support the arts?
Well, I mean, it's not. I'm not the first to say it, but the arts got us through lockdown. I mean, everybody cites Netflix. All those actors come from somewhere. I mean, I suppose more in newer generations, they're doing less theatre and they're just coming straight into film. But there were a lot of theatre companies as well who then turned to television. They're competing with Netflix. But Bruiser Theatre Company on I think it's the 25th end of the month are putting out Mojo Mickey Bo by Owen McCafferty, which was Mickey Bo and Me, the film about the two little boys growing up in Belfast from either side of the community. And a very successful film. It's a play originally. That play is going to be, on Zoom or whatever it is, if you want to check it out. The arts kept going. The arts, I describe this as cockroaches. After the atom bomb, we'll come back. The arts will always be there, There will be constant fires in the rainforest every so often, but green shoots always come. There's been real pain, real suffering, real loss. There's been, there'll be people who've been knocked out of the arts who'll never come back in again. And they could have been the next Einstein equivalent, and we've lost them. But the arts will find a way to come back. They keep doing it, no matter how many times governments manage to cut the funding or neglect the arts. And yet the next thing is they want you to promote them at the Olympics. They want to talk about the literature and the music and the poetry and the acting, and they wheel us all out to dance and show how well we're doing. So the arts will come back. And I think the public, there's no demand on the public. People, do whatever you want. Do what you like. If you think you see something you want to go and see it, support it. If you have a conscience and you feel, I'm going to go and see this thing that I know I'm not going to like, but I need supported, good for you. I've done that, and sometimes you'd be surprised. You might end up liking it as well. And it's about a diversity in a society, and lots of monkeys, lots of typewriters.
When I introduced you, I said that you were an actor, a director, that you're a writer, you're a narrator, you are an observer, and then as well as all the other things, you're a former teacher, husband, father, and all of that. Can I ask you this? And it may seem to be somewhat of a silly question, and it's the last question because we are out of time. Looking back over that long, long career, and you've told us about nearly about 3 parts of it, and there must have been parts that weren't so good, but leaving that aside. And when you talk about acting, from where I am, there's a twinkle in your eye. I don't know whether that's deliberate or otherwise. And there's a smell coming now. Have you enjoyed it?
Oh yeah. I loved it. I mean, I still love it. And it goes, it's gone. You know what I mean? You think of the great performances, but for that moment, that you exist with another person or with a group of people, there is a magic about it. And when I was 14, I came across a poem by a guy called Don Marquis, who used to be a newspaper columnist with the Sun, a New York Sun or something like that. And the column that he wrote was it was done through another person. It used to be written by a cockroach who came into the office at night and jumped onto the typewriter and it was all in lowercase because he couldn't do capital letters. And he wrote a book called Archie and Mehatable, which is about the cockroach coming in and writing a newspaper column for him every night. And he got to know a cat called Mehatable, an old theatre cat, and they would have discussions and he would write these poems down. And the poem I came across when I was 14 in school, and I still have the book, was about the time the cockroach encountered a moth, and it was called The Lesson of the Moth. And he describes how he's talking to a moth one evening, and he says, why do you guys, fly towards a flame? If you're flying around that light, if that had been an uncovered candle instead of an electric light bulb, you'd now be a small, unsightly cinder. Have you no sense? And the moth says, plenty of it, he answered. But at times we get tired of using it. We crave beauty and excitement. We're like human beings used to be before they got too civilized to enjoy themselves. So we know if we get too close to the flame, it will kill us. But what does that matter? It's better to be burned up with beauty and to live a short time than to live a long time and be bored all the while. And the cockroach says, before I could argue him out of his philosophy, he went and immolated himself on a patent cigar lighter. And he says, personally, I would have twice half the happiness and twice the longevity. But at the same time, I wish there was something I wished as much as he wanted to fry himself. And to me, that's what we do in the performance world, in the theatre or whatever. Some of it is captured on film. Others, and I would contend possibly some of the greatest moments are never captured on film. It's like when I'm in the opera house or in a parish hall or in a church hall, like I was in the Westbourne Shipyard Church doing Boat Factory, and there was wee women there who got it and who just understood and connected and with their grandparents or their great grandparents and went, I understand. And it was because I did that. And to me, that's the magic.
Well, I don't know. You couldn't end on a better quotation. I get it. I get you. I'm really appreciative. I know you're busy and I know you've taken time out. And those hedges won't cut themselves. So
no, they won't. I'm still wet, actually. I'm so
use them here as an excuse. Don, for being an entertaining and incisive and a great guest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe.